Thank you, Heather. Good morning, I'm Dave. I'm the co-founder of Arijea, and I'm here today to share with you a tale of dev speed, which ended up with me being able to develop for cloud and server simultaneously. So last year, there I was in San Francisco with my wife, where we've been living for around 3 years. I'd been working for Atlassian there, and I was working on the marketplace team, ecosystem DevRel, and finally on the HipChat web client team. Prior to that, I'd been in Sydney working on Jira. So at the end of last year, around the 9th of September, my family increased by one little person, and my wife and I had a good chat, and we decided to leave the warm embrace of Charlie and head home to Sydney. So there I was in Sydney, just minding my own business, being a good father, being a good son, when along came Nick Muldoon. Nick Muldoon, he's the ex-Greenhopper product manager and ex-Twitter Agile coach. And he said to me, "Dave, what are you doing?" I was like, just enjoying myself in Sydney here. He says, "Oh, how would you like to start an Atlassian marketplace business?" And I had a good think about this, and Nick, having been the Twitter Agile coach, he knows a thing or two about Agile. And I'd written the odd Atlassian add-on myself, so I figured, that sounds like a good idea, let's give that a shot. And so Arijea was formed, an Atlassian marketplace business. So we headed an hour and a half south of Sydney to a place called Wollongong. And you're all invited next year to Atlas Camp 2017 in Wollongong. It's going to be fantastic. It's a beautiful little town. It's just far enough away from Sydney to be quiet, but just close enough to be able to pop up if needs be. And it was there that we developed our first add-on. Our fourth add-on, our most recent add-on, Easy Agile User Story Maps for Jira. It's a great add-on. It allows you to run a user story mapping session inside of Jira. Can I see a show of hands for those who know what story mapping is? Cool, fantastic. So for those who don't know, story mapping is a way to produce a backlog with the customer as the focus. So you can see across the top here, we have a list of epics, which represent key customer activities. And beneath them, user stories, which support that activity. You can sort your epics left and right, from left to right by priority, and the user stories up and down. You can also drag and drop between epic and drag and drop between sprint or version. You can also inline edit the summary or the estimate for that issue. So it's a great way to visualize your backlog as well. So after you've created the story map, you can continue using it to track your story, your sprints and versions through the development of the application. So when I started developing this, I knew I needed to make dev speed a priority, simply because Arijea is a startup. We have very limited runway, and we wanted to get customer feedback as quickly as possible. So to do so, I used some technologies which were very familiar to me from my time on HipChat, being NPM, Webpack, and something new to me is Redux. In total, it took 37 days to go from concept to launch of our first version, and that included 10 days of mine in Japan for a wedding. And the one day I did get to work, this is the view I had out the window. To say the least, it was a little bit distracting. So this is the end result. This is what I'm here to talk to you about, to share with you. It's developing for cloud and server simultaneously. So on the left, we have Jira Server. In the middle, Jira Cloud. And on the right, some code. It's a little bit small, I apologize for that. But on the right, if you see the code there, it's actually React. So if you're not familiar with the syntax, that's what it looks like. And what I'm doing is I'm deleting an image tag. And you'll see that, quite small, I know I should have made this bigger, but next to the issue key on that tag is actually, on the issue key next to the, next to the issue key, there's a little image which will disappear and pop back. On server, it happens first and then slightly after in cloud, just simply due to the latency involved. So that's why I'm here today in beautiful Barcelona, to share with you how I went about this. So I'm going to talk to you about three things: the secret of dev speed, tools for dev speed, and finally, simultaneous development. So the secret of dev speed. It's simple. Just drink heaps of coffee. Just kidding. It only works once, and you end up feeling pretty sick. Honestly, the real secret of dev speed I discovered when I was listening to my audiobook of Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. It's a fantastic book, and for a lot of nuggets of information of how you think, it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. This one quote stood out to me, which goes, "Intuitive expertise depends essentially on the quality and speed of feedback, as well as on sufficient opportunity to practice." So this is a fairly dense quote, so I've transliterated it into Dave language, which sounds a little like this. When something is quick to do, you will do it more often and master it faster. So it's that last bit, master it faster, which I really want to talk about. I'm going to back up actually one more time. So for me, dev speed was about getting things done quickly. But this made me realize there's more to it. So just imagine you're learning to drive a car for the first time. You press the accelerator, you can feel the car move. You get feedback quickly. You press the brake, you get the same. You get inertia, turning, the same kind of thing. Now picture yourself learning to drive a super tanker, a really big boat. You accelerate, you can't feel anything. You slow down, no, you can't feel anything either. Turning, it takes ages to turn. And so it takes a long time to get feedback. So bringing this down to a development perspective, you want to make sure that when you do things, you can experiment quickly and get feedback really quickly. And that will help you to master it faster. So the secret of dev speed isn't so much working faster, it's becoming an expert faster. Because as you grow into an expert, you become faster. It's a positive feedback loop. So to develop faster, you need the right tools. And for me, those right tools were Webpack and Redux. So Webpack is a tool which will build your JavaScript. It'll take all of your dependencies and compile them into one JavaScript file. And Redux is a library specifically made for dev speed. So Webpack, as I said, it can build your JavaScript. It'll produce your production version of JavaScript which you can ship in your final application. However, it also has an amazing feature during development which allows you to run a server, like an actual node server, which will produce your JavaScript for you as you code. It's called Hot Reload. It's a hot reload server. So essentially what it does is it'll watch your changes, and instead of sending the entire JavaScript file back to the browser and refreshing the browser, it will send a patch of just the module that has changed, which allows you to do the thing I showed you before without reloading the page. However, there's a caveat. You need to instrument your code a little bit to take advantage of this. And here's a good example. Just imagine this little envelope is a state with some state inside, is a traditional JavaScript file, like a jQuery plugin, for example, which reads some elements from the page when you load the page. And it keeps references to those elements inside its memory. If you ask Webpack to reload that module, it'll take it away and put the new version back, but the state's gone. So it doesn't work so well. Luckily for me, the developer, Dan Abramov, who built Redux, also built React Hot Reload. And so what React Hot Reload does is allows you to, it'll wrap all of your components in a proxy. And it's this proxy which maintains the state for you. And any function call which is done on the proxy is obviously also called on the internal component. So when you ask for the internal component, which is the one you're working on, to be replaced, the state moves into the proxy, the component's reloaded and put back into the component. So this means your state is maintained. And Redux. So Redux is the library which is made for dev speed. So Dan, when he built this, he pretty much was just fed up with reloading his website to get things done. He knew it was not necessary, and he just doesn't like things getting in his way. He likes to just develop without any roadblocks. So he built this. So can I see a show of hands of those who have used React and specifically Flux? Cool. So for those who don't know, Flux is a unidirectional design pattern for building applications. You have these concepts which are actions, which refer to things the user can do inside the application. Dispatches, which will listen to those actions and then dispatch events throughout your application. Stores, which store the data that you have inside your application, and then components, which render that data. So this is great. It's a unidirectional design pattern, which is easy to conceptualize. And this is one of the reasons that React is so popular, is that it's very easy to build complicated things quickly. Redux uses the same pattern, but slightly differently. Instead of having stores, it just has one state object. And that state object is passed into, with an action, to a function called a reducer. Now, a reducer is a deterministic function. It's synchronous. It's easy to test. All it does is take the state and the action and then return a new state based on that action. So the action can have a payload, and depending on that, it can mutate the state, but not necessarily mutate the actual state. It will return a copy with that mutation applied. And that's really important, that last part. These are functional, atomic functions. They don't actually mutate the state of the state, they just return a new version. And the reason why that's handy is with the Redux development tools, you can maintain a list of these transactions. And you can see if I disable one of those actions, the result changes. And I can re-enable it, and the result will change again. This is quite a difficult concept, so I'm going to show you how it actually works. This is real. This is from the website of Redux Dev Tools. It's just a simple GIF of someone using a to-do app, which is powered by Redux. So in the middle, you can see the to-do app. And on the right, you can see a list of actions occurring. It goes quite quickly, so I'm going to let it play for a little while. But what he does is he marks a to-do is done, and you can see a mark to-do event occur with a little bit of state and an action applied to it. And then he adds a couple more to-dos. And then he goes and disables the mark to-do action and inspects the state that goes along with that. So this is incredibly powerful. Imagine you're building a really complicated application, like a banking software or something like that. And the thing you want to work on is 5 clicks deep in the application. So you go through, you click through, and you get to that point that the component you're concerned with is visible. And what you do is you go into your code and you change it, and then that will update the visual stuff. But if you want to replay actions to determine that logic is completed, there's no need to reload the page. There's no need to go through those 5 previous steps. You can just replay those actions or turn them on and off as you want. It's a huge dev speed win. So these are the tools I use for dev speed, and I highly recommend them: Webpack and Redux. So this finally led me to simultaneous development. I didn't attempt to do simultaneous development. That wasn't my goal. My goal was to be able to move quickly whilst developing. It just happened that this was an amazing feature that I could take advantage of. So Webpack Hot Reload Server is just that. It's a server, and you can depend on it from multiple locations, being Jira Server and Jira Cloud simultaneously. Feeding into Webpack is my shared NPM module. This module is private, it's my own module, and Webpack, being the beautiful thing it is, can produce 2 different artifacts from that one module. So it's quite complicated, and I'll describe it a little later, but essentially what you can do is have an entry point for server and an entry point for cloud, and produce 2 artifacts. So a key example of that is that the client code I need is different for server and for cloud. For cloud, you need to use the AP request function, and in Jira Server, you can just use Ajax directly. So what I do is I wrap my clients in an abstraction layer, which is essentially like a function which passes in the ability to do the request, so either the Ajax function or the AP request function, and then the parameters, and it will perform that request. And so I can produce a cloud version or a server version, depending on which environment I'm looking at. And so here it is again, the final result of developing simultaneously. And this is how I develop. I don't obviously have them all up like this, 1/3 of the screen each, but I do run both versions simultaneously when I'm developing so that I can ensure that when I develop the feature I'm working on, it works for both cloud and server before I ship it. And it means I don't have to go back. So obviously cloud is going to iterate much quicker than server. It doesn't mean I have to go back and redo all of my features when I develop server. This is all very complicated, and I want you guys to take a photo of this screen because maybe you can't visit the URL right now, but I've built an example application you can all clone and play with and send me pull requests. And this is the basis of the Easy Agile User Story Maps add-on. It allows you to build a Jira Server and Jira Cloud add-on quickly. And there's a shared code there, which is an NPM module. So it's everything I've talked about in code. And for real, try it out. There's more. One little piece more I wanted to share with you when I was developing for server specifically. So for Jira Server, when you're using Jira Server in development mode, so you've run Atlas debug, there's actually a flag which is set, which is a Atlassian dev mode. And what that does is has the effect of not compiling all the JavaScripts into one file for the core of Jira, which honestly, when I'm developing add-ons, I don't care about. I don't want to be able to inspect that JavaScript too much. I've got my own Webpack JavaScript, which is running in its own little isolation. And so what I did is I disabled Atlassian dev mode and created my own dev mode, Arijea dev mode. And what it does is instead of sending, let me just take a step back. When you have all of the JavaScripts for Jira being sent to your browser individually, there's over 350 of them. So it's quite slow to reload the page when inevitably you do have to do so. So in my dev mode, I just document write a reference to my Webpack dev server, which loads my one file and leaves Jira itself in production mode. So it's at least a 10x speed up for my development loop in Jira. So my key takeaway for you guys today, apart from the demo app, is to make dev speed a priority. Because as you grow into an expert, you will be able to develop faster. And as you develop faster, you become more confident, and you can grow, and you can become a better team. And this is really what you should be aiming for. Rather than just getting things done quickly, you should be making yourself better. So thank you very much for that. I'm Dave Elkan, and I'm happy to take any questions if we have any time. Thank you. Yes, good question there. Heather, there's a question here.
Thanks for the presentation anyways. A question. The main thing about the applications that you're making is that the client is really thick, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and you're doing most of the persistence on the client side and you're not relying on the backend too much?
Correct.
Okay.
That's one thing I failed to mention, was that Easy Agile User Story Maps is primarily based on the Jira software API. So we don't necessarily need to store data of our own, but I dare say, and there is actually a wrapper for cloud and server. So I have a server add-on. I don't try to create two backends from one. We have two specific add-ons. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I failed to mention that. But at the same time, if you are building on an API, then it is a really good way to do so. And there are ways now that you can store data fairly easily across both platforms.
Dave, can you expand a little bit more on the document.write to the hot reload server and so on, a little bit more about how that works in practice?
Oh, sure thing. So I have two web resource entries in my Atlassian XML plugin file. One which is enabled when I have my system property, which is Arijea dev mode enabled, and one which is disabled when that's not there. And so one resource entry will point to the final version of the JavaScript, which is produced by Webpack. And then the other one will simply be a script tag, which document writes a script tag pointing to localhost :3000/jiraserver.js. And that JavaScript file will load from Webpack dev server, and it initiates, what it does, the Webpack dev server will create a WebSocket connection. And then the reload server can send updates to the browser through that connection. So that's the way I do that, get around that refresh slowness in Jira's server. More questions? One more? One more? You hear that? Sorry.
Sorry for making you run all the way. Yeah, so about the state in your reactive applications.
Yes.
Am I the only one hearing something weird about state in reactive applications? Like you were saying that there is a proxy which mutates the state in the reactive application, really?
No, so what happens is React hot reload is a tool which will automatically instrument your React components, being the view layer. And it will wrap that component in another component, okay? And when it's requested, so essentially it stores the state that is inside that component. And the component inside, as if you change the code representing that component gets taken away and put back, and state is re-injected into that internal component. So yeah, check out the documentation of React hot reload, and it explains it much better than I can. Thank you all very much for your time today.